to get 1996, if we can advance a lot of time.
Yeah, please.
With Pope Francis actually is the Archbishop Bergoglio is the prelate there in Buenos Aires in 1996 when this occurs.
That's kind of amazing.
That is kind of amazing. And what happens is in this particular, somebody has abandoned a host in the back of the church, probably had taken it out and then, for whatever reason was going to use it for some nefarious purpose, but changes his mind. It's there at the back of the church. This lady finds it, brings it back to the priest, who in turn then puts it into a glass of water to dissolve it. Normally it will dissolve within a day and a half. Then you pour it, from that water into a sacrum or a place.
You won't just throw that in the trash.
You
right?
don't.
Right. I mean,
No.
I just want to clarify. There's procedures around all these things.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So anyway, he puts it in the glass in the tabernacle. Well, it comes back a few weeks later.
It's still there.
Not only is it still there, undisturbed, not decomposing significantly at all, but he sees this big red ring growing out of the host.
My gosh.
And so he's going, well, that's not just a bloody host.
Yeah,
that looks like there's actual flesh growing out of that host.
Praise God.
So anyway, he talked to Bishop Bergoglio, and Bishop Bergoglio says, don't take it out of the water. Just take photographs of it, and just we'll study it, after we've given it some time.
Yeah.
So they took photographs of the host. Get this, it remains in water for 3 years. 3 years.
What?
Yes, 3 years it remains in water, and it still hasn't dissolved. And the ring of flesh, that crescent of flesh, is still very evident growing out of
Still there
the
now?
host. Oh, yes. Yes, I'll explain that in just 1 second. In fact, it's very fascinating. So, of course, they do some comparisons of photographs, right? And Archbishop Bergoglio, Pope Francis says, well, wait a minute here. We ought to get this over to a lab to see what this tissue is. So
I love how scientific the church is.
Yeah.
That we're employing, in the case of Lanciano, an atheist scientist to study the host, right?
Yeah.
We're not going to be taking the fool.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, this case, he took a sliver of this host, and this was the scientist who came to do this was an atheist. In fact, not just Dr. Ricardo Castañón Gomez. The Vatican ought to give him a statue because the guy paid for all of these things initially out of his own money. Well, he did for Tixla. He didn't for Buenos Aires. Buenos Aires is paid for by the Archdiocese of Buenos Aires. But the main thing is he takes this piece of tissue and sends it to Dr. Frederick Zugaby in the pathology lab at New York University.
Wow.
And so Frederick Zugaby gets this sample back, and he is absolutely floored because first of all, he doesn't know where it came from. He doesn't know that it's a Eucharistic host. But what he is saying is, well, wait a minute. In this host, there is a prolific number of white blood cells. Now, white blood cells, when you take, if you took that piece of flesh off the heart, you'd have to take it from a living heart, because white blood cells will only live for a very, very short amount of time after it's removed from the heart.
Wow.
And then they will die. But then, so it means that, when that tissue had gotten up to Dr. Zugaby in New York, the white blood cells were still alive. In other words, yeah, and not only were they alive, they had embedded themselves in the tissue comes from the ventricle wall in the upper left ventricle, because he could identify
a particular part of the heart
that pumps the blood to the rest of the body.
No.
And the white blood cells had embedded themselves in that tissue, which means very likely that the man had experienced something like a polytrauma, right? So this is all in his, and if people want the pathology report, I'm happy to send it to you to put on your website. But
Yes, please.
I've got the pathology letter from Zugabe himself. Then he is
The part
told
of the heart that pumps the blood into
the rest of the body.
the rest of the body.
That's right.
I contemplate that for the rest of the day.
And it's a wounded heart, right? Because the guy's undergone a polytrauma, because that's the only way you're going to get these white blood cells trying to do their healing activity, like phagocytizing lipids and things that are very unhealthy for the heart tissue. It's trying to heal the heart tissue, in that upper left ventricle. So that why is it trying to heal it? Because it's been pounded or suffered a cardiac arrest, or it's undergone a polytrauma. So it definitely is a wounded heart. And this is growing out of the host. Well, of course, Castellan Gomez, he was an atheist, but he starts getting all these genetic tests done, one test after the next. But unfortunately, he waited a long time, and 3 years in the water, So when they didn't get an amplifiable profile, they thought, well, you left it in the water too long, and furthermore, you waited too long to get the genetic test. But that wasn't Castellan Gomez's fault at all. It was the protocol that was actually
Is he
called
a Catholic
for.
now?